Today's meeting, Environment and Transport Overview Scrutiny Committee. Good to see you. You had a nice summer and we're ready to rock and roll for the next few months. Okay. I'd like to remind everyone present that the meeting will be broadcast live via the County Council's website and will be available for viewing after this meeting. Can everyone please switch their microphone on when speaking, turn it off then when you have finished speaking. Also, make sure your phones are off. And if you've got a computer, but you can have it on, of course, but make sure it doesn't bleep. You know, when they go bing, I feel like, you know, it's a bit strange when that does that, okay? So, we'll get started with the agenda. So we've got minutes of the last meeting. I propose that the minutes of the meeting held on the 28th of June be taken as read, confirmed and signed. Can I have Janet and Mr. Morgan will second that, thank you. And then we go straight on to question time. We've received a question from Mr. Terry Kirby. Are you going to come and sit at the end, Mr. Kirby? Good to see you, sir. Are you well?
Not too bad, thanks.
Good on you, lad. Grab a seat. It's always good to see members of the public who are interested, so we're really keen to see you, Mr. Kirby. It's good to see you. So we've got a copy of the question has been handed out. Forgive me, I tried to get them some earlier, but we did, I think, at the briefing. But I have a second to have a look at the letter. It's been provided, Mr. Kirby, so these can be taken. I would like to remind members that no discussion is to be held on the question. Mr. Kirby, you can ask a supplementary question, but not questions out of the blue somewhere else. You understand? You've been here before, you know what to expect, yeah?
Yes.
You okay with that?
One supplementary question.
Yes.
Members of the public frequently come across situations where the units do not work at the bus stops. They have no idea how to report it. Can we please put some publicity, labels and stickers or something like that on the bus stops near the signs, telling members of the public how they can report any problems?
Mr. Kirby, that's a good answer, a good question. I'll go to Anne, but
yes, thank you. Yes, we can actually, we'll obviously look at that, certainly, but I would just remind anybody, any member of the public, any defect, they can either go through our Highways Customer Services or our Choose How You Move website or a council phone number. So they are, for any highway issues, including real time, they can do that, but we could specifically look at bus stops, etc., near where it's located to highlight that matter.
Mr. Kirby, have you got those details at all to contact? Those, has Mr. Kirby got them? Are they? Oh, sorry. I guess what I'm asking though, if some of the contacts you've got, members of the public, you do know that obviously this letter's on behalf of those as well, that if you've got the information, you can pass that on for us. Would you do that? Thank you very much, Mr. Kirby. God bless you. Thank you. And now we go on to a question asked by members under Standing Order 7.3 and 7.5. That letter was from Mr. Maxond.
Thank you, Chair. May I just say, in response to the last question, how grateful I think many members are to the work that Terry Kirby does in supporting bus users. It takes people like that to bring things forward.
Yeah, and as I said myself, it's good to see a member of the public, and we both agree on that.
Indeed.
This is what democracy is all about, isn't it?
It is indeed, Chair, yes. The question arises, Chair, from the use of the term technology neutral, I think 3 times in our last meeting, but it was a phrase which I was unfamiliar with in the context of what we do here, and indeed it doesn't appear anywhere in any documents that I could find. So I'm grateful for the answer, which I have to say is a subjective interpretation of the term, which means nothing to me. I'd just like to confirm with officers that when we say we're technology neutral, it does not mean that we will we don't rule out any technologies. We do rule out some technologies. It has no meaning. In fact, we are a market-driven approach. That's what we do. Thank you.
Anne, any response to that? Is it Joe? Anne, anything?
Technology neutral in as far as actually we are not committed to one form of technology. We'd always look at the evidence on balance to see the best decision at the time. Obviously technology continually changes, so we haven't committed to any one particular technology. So in terms of, you know, ruling out or in, life keeps moving on. As we all know, technology's changed. So we haven't nailed our colours to the mast at one point in time and says, this is it and we're going with that. We're open to see what happens. And what we'd want to do is go with the best technology we assessed at that particular time when we had to go through our procurement. Don't know if that helps, Max.
Sorry, if I may, Chair, as well, just to add to that. It dates back to a time when we were producing the joint municipal strategy as well, and at that time there were other parts of the country, which is where this term came from, that were taking very different positions. So for example, for grounds that only they can decide upon, they were making a stance, for example, to say they would not support any form of energy from waste that involved incineration. Now, we in the production of ours did not make a decision that a specific technology on whatever grounds was out of scope. And finances were only one. They are substantial and continue to be in the periods of austerity reason to judge it. But we have a range of technologies, solutions in managing waste at the minute, and they vary widely in terms of price. They are not solely on the basis of the cheapest for best.
Is that okay, Max? I gather I do get the gist. Like, I'm on Windows 10 and I know I used to like Windows 3, so I did have to change a little bit. I think that takes us away now from the questions, so we now go on to agenda item 4. We've not, and I've not received any notification of any urgent items. Declaration of interest. Have we got any declaration of interest on the items of this agenda? None. I think we've got none. Declarations from the whip accordance to the rule, overview and scrutiny procedure rule 16. No. Number 7, presentations of petitions under standing order 36. I have not received any petitions. So now we go straight on to agenda item 8, and this is the waste disposal authority plan. We'll go to the Director of Environment for this, just to say that the report... Sorry, Joe, we're going to Joe, actually. Sorry, Joe. You can see Joe's been on holiday. She looks new, young, vitalised. Okay, Joe, wonderful. But just to say, this is more of an internal report which has been developed because there's a bit of a stopgap as we go to in the next few years with the national regulations, etc. So it's good to share it, and I think we're very pleased to see that. So go over to Joe to go through the report. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Did you not notice I paled slightly with the suggestion that it might be that I was the director? I'll leave that to Anne. Yes, as you said, this is an internal document, Chair, and through you, as stated, I think the purpose of the report is as much information giving, but certainly up for debate, but to provide scrutiny with an overview of the Council's recently produced Waste Disposal Authority plan, and it's appended in full to the report. The early sections of the covering report up to point 12 do explain the sort of historic strategic policy context around why we've come to a view that we need a waste disposal authority plan. And I wouldn't want to undermine the fact that we have the Leicestershire Municipal Waste Management Strategy, which is produced by the Waste Partnership, so the 7 district councils and ourselves. And that remains the bedrock strategic document with the policy. So this Waste Disposal Authority plan simply takes the disposal authority, the county council's responsibilities within that strategic document, and rolls them forward to cover a period up to 2030, because the joint strategy is currently only covering the period up to 2020. The reason that we've also done this is the guidance, whilst it's mandatory that we have the joint municipal strategy, does suggest that best practice requires us to review that document every 5 years, and we were due to do that towards the end of 2016. However, we wrote to government because there is currently very little or no legislation beyond 2020 because it's very much EU driven. So it would have been pointless to produce a new strategy with a vacuum beyond 2020. They acknowledged our concerns somewhat and have been working on that legislative position, and we are still waiting for it, and that is also referenced in the report. So we got external consultant support just to validate the approach of producing this plan, which is in line with what some other waste disposal authorities have chosen to do. The plan itself is covered in the report from point 12 and, as I've already mentioned, remains within the scope and aims of the existing municipal strategy. It is deliberately high level, so it has priorities and objectives, but it doesn't go into the detail. And as you'd expect, officers will take the detail as and when we need to look at a specific piece of activity and do a full business case, and then that would be put before Scrutiny and Cabinet for a decision. It does take account of changes that have happened since we last did a full review, which was back in 2011, and a lot has changed with austerity and waste growth, so we've tried to project that forward through the period up to 2030. And I think really the fundamental need for this document is the County Council's enters into long-term procurements. We have to for core business, so we may have a disposal contract that runs for the period up to 2030. Now, the risk to the authority would be of a procurement challenge, so somebody in industry saying you're making these decisions without a strategic framework. So we've simply rolled forward our position, which was agreed through a public consultation, until such time as the government gives us a new strategic position on legislation. We would then liaise with our district colleagues, redo the joint strategy, and we would look to co-align this plan to that position at that point. It doesn't set new targets. I've mentioned why we haven't had to do a public consultation, because it's internally focused. And on government's position, I think it's covered in the report, but we expect the resources and waste strategy to be issued, we hope, by the end of this calendar year. That will then allow us to progress the other issues that I've already mentioned. And because it's internally focused, it is not required that we take this on to Cabinet. Thank you, Chair.
So I'm quite happy to take some questions. If anybody would like to question this document or whatever, I'm ready for that. Welcome, Mr. Crooks. Don't see you very often at this committee, but it's nice to see you.
Thank you. Just a quick question on the percentages, the reduction in percentages for recycling. And I know that local councils are now charging for green waste collections, and that must have had an effect. I also know that some councils did food waste collection, which I believe has now stopped. But are there any other reasons for these figures dropping that you know of?
Yes, I'm going to steal the thunder of a number of reports if I answer this in full, so I may skim over it and there's an opportunity to come back. Nicola has a report in terms of coming on this agenda about our Q1 performance, and it does recognise the point you make that performance is dropping on recycling and composting. The short answer is you're absolutely right that it's that important that what officers have suggested is that we'll bring a more detailed report on just that indicator to the October scrutiny. So we will explore that in full, and we have produced a separate report which does go into far more of the detail of why we think that's happening. And the short answer is it's not straightforward. There are lots of things happening, be it districts charging for garden waste, reclassification of certain types of waste. In the past, we could count street sweepings as a compost type product, and we now can't. There are things happening in how people actively engage in life, so they read their news online and they don't buy newspapers. But it's looking at the report that will come in October tries to look at the detail of that and try and understand if things that are happening in Leicestershire are uniquely different to what's happening nationally.
Is it true also that I was at a presentation a few weeks ago in Malton from Sally is the last name, and the changes to what you can recycle and the different plastics and what's worth recycling, what used to be worth is no longer, so they don't want it. And that, I think also that has an impact. But I must confess, as a councillor, that was an education for me, that it was all these different things I thought you could recycle, you can't, and some you could, I didn't think you could, you can. So I think that was maybe we should do a presentation to all the councillors, so because I didn't do very well in the scores. Anyway, any more questions?
Thank you, Chairman. On page 42, objectives 2C, ensure that the RHW workforce is appropriately skilled and trained to deliver high quality customer service. Can I ask, how often does the appropriate training take place with the workforce, please? Thank you.
Again, through you, Chair, when we insourced, when we brought in-house the running of 13 of the 14 recycling household waste sites, we went through quite an intensive training programme. The council has a lot of mandatory training, but we're also aware that we ask these individuals to do quite a challenging job to support the public, but there can be difficult conversations, confrontations, so we've done some extra training with our operatives around customer service and care. Outside of this, if we ever hear of any incidents where there have been altercations or interactions, then I'm happy to take those, and we do refresh the training certainly annually, but we do a lot of pointed training. So, for example, dealing with difficult conversations with the operatives just because of the nature of the work that they do.
Through the Chair, the training only takes place at once a year as an update to them. Is that, would it not be better that if they had a little bit more training at regular intervals? Thank you.
Just to come back, I mean, I will double check, but that's not true. We do a full refresh annually, but we also do very regular what we call toolbox talks. So if we feel that either in a location there is a degradation of service or there are issues with individuals that we think they either individually or collectively as a team on a specific site, we will go in and just drop into that location and do a toolbox talk and refresh on specific issues that are happening. So that happens throughout the year. So again, I require the information, and if we feel that that warranted a toolbox talk, we would go and have a look and tailor it to what we think is happening in that area.
We'll have the lead, Blake Payne, would like to...
Yeah, thanks, Chairman. I just want to take the opportunity to make the following comment, well, two comments. As lead member, I get the privilege of going to first and seeing other sites that other councils operate or their partners operate on their behalf. And it struck me only the other day how efficient we actually operate our own sites in terms of what we've had to do to balance the resource envelope against the services that we deploy. And to that extent, I think it's probably worth saying that we have a very streamlined, lean structure of operatives at our sites, and that's hugely impressive and a credit not only to the council but also the operatives that work on the site, because as lead member I often receive complaints about individual circumstances that have arisen at the sites, and I think it's worth noting placing our thanks as a council to those operatives, because they take a huge amount of abuse from the minority of the public. The vast majority of the public are exceedingly good, but unfortunately there are people that use our sites that think it's acceptable to give our operatives a significant amount of abuse, and we try and train them and help them to deal with that type of behaviour, and indeed the directorate and the assistant director will inevitably get involved when those situations arise. But I'd like, as lead member, to place on record our thanks to the operatives for the good work they do on behalf of the Leicestershire County Council.
Thank you for that, and really there's no room for abuse. Really, we're providing a service, and I think we all should be relaxed and calm, and life's a bit too short, but people do get a bit hard-headed, and there's no room for it. But so I guess the message is we contact you, councillors, and then you will handle it from there, and I think that's excellent, and on the individual cases, and that'd be excellent. We've got another question there.
The Bring sites, where the one in particular I'm thinking about is Barwell. I've had one or two people moaning at me about some items now can't be took there. And if the, like for instance my area, they've driven 8 or 9 miles to get to this Barwell tip and then found out they can't get rid of it. And and I'm wondering, well, that's one of the reasons why we're getting a lot of fly tipping, because I had one bloke tell me we're going to chuck it in the edge on the way back. So I know our fly tipping figures have gone up by 100% this year, so I'm concerned that when you get there, for instance, I went and asked, I didn't go with the stuff. I'm tiling the kitchen. I wanted to know where to get rid of my old tiles, and they said they wouldn't take tiles. Now, but there's no directive where to take them if they won't take them at Barwell. So, and nobody was telling me. So I just wondered whether that's certainly a problem for the districts anyway with the tipping.
Joe, you want to?
Obviously, allowing for the fact that I don't want to detract from the meeting, so if there are any specific circumstances in locations, I'm really happy to hang back and have specific conversations. In terms of some of the things you mentioned in relation to Barwell in that example, it goes back to something, Chair, you mentioned. In terms of the site and what the sites provide, what I take from it is we have to continue to work really carefully on our communications, because there can be information overload for members of the public. There have to be so many signs and informations about health and safety and how you access those sites, and it can make you slightly blind. So we constantly think about how we engage with the public so they can use them to their best effect. But at the end of the day, if it is household waste, and I know that's a question in itself, then that will continue and is free to dispose of. When people turn up, for example, a point you made earlier, Chair, about things like plastics, we used to have a system where rigid plastics at some of the sites could be separated and there was a market for selling it. However, that market has dried up for points that if there's simply nobody willing to purchase that material. So now we've taken that provision away because space is a premium and it's going into residual waste. But if you turn up thinking you're going to recycle your rigid plastics in that example, you sort of think you have to take them away. In truth, you simply have to put them in general waste, so you would always be able to have an outlet. But that almost goes back to how our operatives have quite a lot of things that they're trying to engage with a member of the public quite quickly and then passing through that site. So I'll certainly take away thinking about clear messages. In terms of fly tipping, obviously I'm going to say this, that anybody, I understand the frustration, but anybody that does tip anything in a hedgerow, it's a criminal act. And the district councils and ourselves pick up the tab for that activity. So I'd dissuade that absolutely. But in terms of tiles, again, it's just about messages. If it's classed as a fabric of a building, if somebody's done some DIY, for example, and it's not classed as household waste, then that material still can deposit it, but we have a charge for it because it doesn't fall within what we would be paying for through council taxpayers' funds. So it is a complex area. It's why it's difficult for the operatives to manage some of those expectations. But if there are any specifics, I'm certainly happy to have conversations outside the meeting.
So the question has got to be asked, Mr. Crooks, what did you do with your tiles?
I'm still taking them off the wall, so I haven't done anything.
Well, if you go on some of the shows, and if they're old tiles, I don't know how old your house is, it could be worth a few bob. Take them off gently, okay?
I was told I've got the district council to do a bulk collection.
Okay. All right.
Told that I couldn't, even if I wanted to pay at the site, I couldn't get rid of time.
Okay. So you can take it to Charnwood, it's free. He's just told you that, okay?
Yeah, it's just really a comment following on what you said, Chairman. I've been this morning at a seminar about recycling, and I thought I was ever so good, but I'm not. When you look to see what you can do and what you can't recycle, it was amazing what certain things that you could have got metal in it wouldn't go in the plastic. So I think taking on board what you said, it would be quite useful, I think, to have a briefing for councillors of exactly what you can recycle and what have you. And then we can feed it on to our residents, because I have a regular column in a local paper and I like to put things in and just let them know. And in fact, it came out that there's only 13% of us who recycle correctly. There's quite a big proportion of us who recycle, but we don't recycle everything as correctly as we should do. So it was very interesting this morning, and I shall feed back to the officers when I come back. Bye.
Well, thank you, Christine, because I'm the same. I couldn't believe I was getting it wrong. So I guess, Joe, maybe you set up a presentation like we had in Melton for all the councils and invite them. I don't think it'd be a bad thing. Sorry, Max, I was looking the other way.
Sorry, Yeah, on that last point, the problem is that it's really the district councils that can tell us exactly what can and can't be recycled, because it differs from place to place, and what we really need is a unified system across the whole county, don't we, really? But moving back to the paper, what struck me from the tables of figures really was that recycling is still not improving as much as we would like. And when we started to recycle many years ago now, our ambitions were up in the 60s and 70s, but we're still languishing down in the 40s and 50s. And I think that's a real challenge, really, to maintain the public's interest, because I think resources are slim at district level as well as county level, and I just feel that the foot has been taken off the proverbial accelerator here, that we need to keep the message going, and the fact that many of us are not quite clear now what we can recycle and what we can't is a powerful message. I was also struck by the percentage of food waste in the system, 41%. And certainly most districts aren't doing anything with food waste. And perhaps the solution there is to waste less food. Just turning over the page onto 32, it's very interesting the way that trends are going in the different technologies. The more sophisticated technologies are, the more expensive it seems to be. But it's, I'd be interested to know why there's a downturn in energy from waste from about 2014 and a sudden upswing of, it's the MRF, isn't it, the MRF, from about the same time. Because those graphs don't particularly indicate trends well enough, and maybe it's not easy to do that in the market we've got. I think those were the major. I was also struck by the fact that the joint district counties municipal waste management strategy hadn't been updated since 2011, and it seems to me that's part of the problem, that for whatever reason we're unable jointly to up those figures for recycling. Thank you, Chair.
What we'll do is, I don't think we need necessarily a full answer on that. I know Max understands that because we talked about it briefing. That's something we'll have more detail in October, correct?
Certainly we'll talk more around what's happening with the trends on recycling. If I may, Chair, just on something we haven't covered, the figure 2, the page 32, that diagram which shows sort of spends by technology type. If I just give the example, it is very difficult because you're comparing lots of different facilities in different locations where the price of land is different in Surrey to it is in, the top of Scotland. But the point I'd give is the example on energy from waste that's pre-2000 and post-2000. It's a little, the simplest answer I can give is it's a little bit like if you've paid off the mortgage on your house. The infrastructure that was there well and truly before pre-2000, you've paid for all of that infrastructure, and now what they're doing is a process of improvements within the facility. Whereas new infrastructure that's come on stream post-2000, they are still depreciating those 40-50 million pounds worth of spend to invest in the infrastructure, so you see a different spend profile by technology.
Okay, thank you for that explanation. I think that's it for questions. I think we need to move on to our next agenda item, as I turn my page, which is we go on to the review of the highways, that is the gutters, or gully, gutters or gully. Are they the same? Or I suppose they're different, aren't they? Or gullies, or yeah, it depends on your terminology. So this has been a fair discussion at the briefing, the issues, the way we do it, the plans. Strategically, how we work with partners, both in the private sector, and our own in-house performance. I'll hand over to Anne now, who's sort of definitely got the finger on the pulse, okay?
Thank you, Chair. Scrutiny will recall that about a year ago, it was actually last September, we brought a report to this committee about gully cleaning and what we wanted to do in terms of reviewing that. There was a couple of drivers for that. Firstly, government codes of practice in terms of how we maintain our highways asset. And secondly, I think actually our own acknowledgement about our performance in that particular area, given that actually it is quite high in the public agenda, and I'm sure members see that through their mailbags as well. What we have done since that time is carry out a trial then to actually help inform what we want to do going forward, and that's what's set out in this report for you. So I'll briefly take you through that if that's all right. The system we previously, or kind of currently, have been working is for 130,000 gullies across the county. They're cleansed on a cyclical, I can hardly even say the word, programme. So we just go around the county on a programme, and that means actually each gully is cleaned somewhere between 18 and 24 months, okay? What that meant in terms of performance of those 130,000 gullies, we got round about 64,000 every year. So that's what it meant in terms of the actual cleaning of those. The challenges in dealing with gully cleansing and drainage more widely, we have a number. Firstly, the existing asset data we have and our asset data collection regime is a fairly blunt tool at the moment, which restricts, our ability to intelligently look at it in detail and then come up with solutions. We also have a lack of knowledge beyond the gully. We can all see the gullies, you can see the gully covers, it's just they're below that. But beyond that, there's a network of drainage which actually in a lot of areas of the county, we have very limited knowledge of, because actually it's been built up over decades and centuries. So we have limited knowledge of that. The other thing is, it's not always our systems. It could be Severn Trent, etc., etc. So, there's partnership working, etc., with that as well. And the last challenge is I've kind of acknowledged is it does tend to be high profile with the public. The trial itself started last August, ran for 7 months to May this year. The principle was to actually treat those gullies faster that fill up quickly. The ones that really need it get treated on a more frequent basis than those that don't fill up quite so quickly. The objectives of the whole trial were set out as in paragraph 13 of the report for you. The one I can appeal to your attention is the one about benchmarking, and I'll come on to talk about that in a moment. What we did was we used our existing data to build up a network of priority. So priority 1, 2 and 3. Priority 1 being those gullies that would be cleansed more frequently. We cross-checked that with flooding data, and then we began the trial of implementing on a frequency we thought would be actually more frequent than would be needed in reality. And that frequency is set out in table 2 on page 52. So you can see the priority 1 routes were attended every 6 months. And with P2 routes to be every 12 months and then every 24 months. That trial set an objective as well as 50 gullies per day for routes that required traffic management, or if there was no traffic management, required 90 gullies per day. The results of the trial showed that the proposed frequency we estimate could be as, or should be as, in table 3 there. So priority 1 would be every 10 months, priority 2 every 20 months, and priority 3 every 36 months. Overall, on average, however, while that comes up at frequency being the same as the old 18 to 24 months, what it means is the gullies that need treated quicker are actually being treated more frequently there. So we're directing the resource far more effectively. In terms of the benchmarking that I mentioned, we wanted to benchmark ourselves against the private sector to see how we were doing. So we used a subcontractor on some of the network for the trial. And what we did find out, those routes that weren't under traffic management, they didn't require traffic management in order to carry out the gully cleansing, that the private sector outperformed us by up to as much as 60%. Now, obviously, we looked very keenly as to why that was the case. And underlying that was on the analysis, we've established that where we found a problem and the cleansing didn't immediately, deal with the issue and unblock, and the water wasn't flowing through quickly the way we'd want it to, the LCC team spent more time trying to unblock that, whereas the private contractor just moved on and reported the fault. The other aspect was the private contractor offered a bonus per gully cleanse to each individual operative. Under our terms and conditions, we are not able to do that. The trial also showed that we can expect around 10% of defects that need further treatment arising from that regular cleansing. That's kind of where we are with the network in terms of further work that's needed. It could be something like ironworks around the gully itself, could be a really slow outlet that they can't clear, etc., but it needs further action and jobs raised. Table 6 in the report, I'll draw your attention to that because I think that's the kind of key one, really summarises the options then. That at the end of that trial, we thought these are the options we've got of taking forward the gully cleansing activity. The first option there is LCC emptying the gullies on that priority 1, 2 and 3 programme. And you've got the cost there, 1.2 million, and what we would actually achieve is 92,000 gullies being cleared a year. So that's an increase from the existing 64,000 that we get round in a year. So in terms of performance for the community and a level of service, a certain improvement there. The second option was going with the external contractor, and you could see that's at a cheaper cost and the same number, etc., achieved. The third option we looked at was with LCC emptying the gullies, but on the routes that need traffic management, we treated them all as P1. So that was actually because there's very few routes for gully cleansing that require traffic management that were on the P2s and P3s. So in terms of coordination, operation and efficiency, it was better to put them all in P1s. And what we also proposed was that we used half an FTE inspector to go around at the 24-month period to look at the P3s, just to check that we're right, we're on course, it doesn't need emptied yet. So that gives us a bit of assurance and security in terms of that QA, really, that we have got it right for those ones we're seeing that require less frequent treatment. The fourth option there is we go with the external contractor, and again it's the same arrangements about traffic management routes go on P1, and we have an inspector to give us that quality assurance and reassurance regarding the P3. The system that we are going to implement for early next year is that option 4. So we will be going with an external contractor to undertake those works on the basis of every 10 months, 20 months and 36 months. At the same time, we will be procuring a more sophisticated data collection system to help us become more intelligent with our data. And every time we go around and cleanse the gully, we are storing that information. So there will be an annual review to have we got it right. Is this still a P1? Is it still a P2? Is it still a P3? Or do we need to change that frequency? So it will be an ongoing, hopefully, continual improvement process. As I say, we're looking to roll that out from early next year. And the other final point I'll leave you with is we are maintaining or retaining the reactive element of gully cleansing in-house. LCC will be doing that. What we're talking about here is purely the planned cleansing programme. Anything where if you get in your mailbag and you pass on to us, or if public comes directly to us that there's a gully issue wherever, we will have the gangs to go out and deal with that, and the tankers available to go out and deal with that. Overall, the reasoning for that is, one, we're in control of it, and two, I'm sure you'll be aware, if we go out to the private sector on something that is as reactive and ad hoc, and tomorrow we might need 10 gully cleansers and the following day only 1, etc., you pay premium prices for that. Whereas if we've got it in-house, we control the cost and we control, how quickly we're reacting to that. And given, as we all know, that it's fairly important to the public, it's something that's, in terms of our quality of service, is fairly high up there and important for us. I'll stop.
Thank you, Anne. I'll just make a little few points that come to that we mentioned. I think Max and Mr. Gown mentioned about the question was asked, can we play bonuses to our staff? And of course, public service and the way the contracts are designed, we're not allowed to do that. So we can't give incentives, which was a good question. I thought common sense question, isn't it? How can we incentivise our staff? There is other incentives they get. And I think just on the data, which is quite exciting, as we all know as councillors, somebody will give you, say, we have, say, Nottingham Road, which goes a long way. Well, whereabouts on Nottingham Road is the gully? And it pinpoints that. And we have that issues with bins, or which bin, because there may be 10 on a road, it may be only one bin that's causing the problem with being overflown. So those sort of technology is excellent to have, saves time, and of course we can be more precise and then build a better, more data to really understand what is actually going on. So can I take some questions, please? Mr. Crooks, you're really having a good reserve job here today, aren't you? Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Chairman. Strange enough, this item came up on the parish council meeting on Monday night at Newbold. There are some gullies on Desford Road at the top of Main Street in Newbold Verdon, which, according to residents, and I know I've seen them like it for a long while, but I wouldn't know the time span, but they reckon it's 3 years that they haven't been touched. And you know, I've noticed when I've been going by the amount of vegetation growing out of them. Admittedly, the summer's caused that to die back a bit, but it's beginning to get going again now. So they are absolutely block solid, and they've been like that quite a while. But I don't, the residents say it's 3 years, I don't know, but it's certainly 2 years at least. But just moving on from that, the last 3 or 4 that I've reported as blocked, and that is becoming a big issue in my area, unfortunately. You know, it's catching up fast with dog reports. Have been where our people have gone out, and admittedly they've gone out pretty quick and had a look at them. They've not been able to deal with it. It's had to have the road dug up. Recent one is Stapleton, and again on this same road that I said earlier, further along, we had to dig the whole road up and put a new drainage system in there. So, and I think that cost about 50 grand, according to the paperwork that I saw on it. So it is becoming a big issue, and I do wonder sometimes, and I know systems are bonus because I've been involved with it years ago when I was at work. It's not always the best system because you get people cutting corners when they're trying to earn bonus, and I do wonder whether that is one of our problems with some of these blockages. You know, they're moving on too quick and perhaps not completing the job, where our people, as you said earlier, just spending that little bit extra time. So I'm wondering whether, you know, at the end of the day, it's not cost effective having to dig the road up to sort it out. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Crooks. I think we did discuss it, and it is swings and roundabouts. It's one of those. We've got a very effective team. From experience, we've had some good results when we make the phone call. The other issue that hasn't been mentioned, and it was mentioned in the briefing, is cars. Yeah. How do you clean gutters when there's people? I'm sure all of us are in this situation where we've got residents who have got a 3-bedroom house, they've got 4 cars, and they're all parked outside. How do you get them to move them if they've left 2 cars, they're at work? They ain't going to move them. So we have got some barriers. Anyway, over to Anne.
Just on that point, sorry if I can just, because you've mentioned it, and I can let you know, the advantages of this kind of more intelligent data system is we will record the streets where we have a high percentage of cars blocking gullies, so that next time we put in place a temporary traffic regulation order prior to us going out, so we can clean the gullies. So it's about more effective time and resource. We don't just go there and we can't do it. Actually, we go there and we can do it.
Any more questions?
Thank you. It's really following on from that on 2 points. I think, particularly if you live in the older villages, and as was mentioned in the report you gave to us, the ownership of the drains in the first place, the age of them. I mean, if the village I live in, if the railway bridge can fall in, then I'm sure some of the drains do too. And I know a lot of work's being done at the moment with partners and it is finding out where these places are. The road I live in, some of the houses there are 150 years old, so it's a nightmare. What I was going to say though, with all this new mapping you've got and all the things you're learning, is it possible to involve the councillors more? particularly when I know you put out temporary road orders, and I know things like that. We don't always pick it up immediately, but if we know in advance, all councillors and parish councils are always, and town council, are always putting out information. So if I knew that in my division, certain roads, the week commencing the 17th of September, were going to be done, I've got residents in some of those roads would be more than happy to go and put notes on people's doors saying, please note, if you can, move your car, the gullies are going to be done. And, you know, we're in communication with our constituents and our residents, probably with a greater respect more than you are. And a lot of them know us. And if we can do it regularly like that, I'm sure that would help. And it would probably prevent you having to keep going back or having emergencies. So I think we use you use us as well. It's a form of communication.
No, I appreciate that offer. Many thanks, and we will take you up on that. Where we are working at the moment is really on the digital agenda, things like we've done with our grass cutting, so people can go in and help themselves because they can see where the grass is going to be cut, when it was last cut, when it will be cut next. We'll aim to do that, roll that out across our services. Now, obviously, gully emptying can be the same with our programme. I think the challenge for us will be then thinking, how do we alert you rather than requiring you to go in and look on the website or the members area, because there's a members hub being developed to give you the information about what's going on in your area, how that can either give you an alert or something automatic, so that one, it's not onerous in our area and it's not onerous for you, but you're getting that information. But we definitely want to have it there so it's publicly accessible, either by a member of the public, and then we need to think about the next stage, how we're proactive to make sure that that's at your fingertips as well.
Thank you, Hilary. That was a good question. Blake, you've got your hand up, and then we'll go to Brenda. I'm just
Chairman, if you take Brenda first, and then I'll wrap up at the end.
over to you, Brenda.
Thank you very much, Chair. It might be an actual moot point if we go for option 4 anyway. Obviously, using contractors, I don't know what sites they'd be based at, whether they've got their own sites or they would still use our sites. But I had the gullies, and I don't want to talk about a specific area, but I had the gullies cleared outside my house. That sounds awful, doesn't it? They're very nice, thank you very much. That's it. I did say, do you know who I am? But they had problems because it had to be flushed out several times, and there was a blockage. They'd left a cable tight and spray paint on the path to say that this gully's blocked, and they had to come back several times. And why they had to come back several times was they had to go back to Mount Sorrel to fill up with water. And you know, I had a chat with them, and they have to do that quite often, and that's annoying. Apparently, what they used to be able to do was to use the fire hydrants and fill up that way. So they had to, I presume there's sites all over Leicestershire, and it's Mount Sorrel was the nearest one for ours. I mean, is that true? Did they used to fill up by fire hydrants? Why can't they do that now? And do they have to waste time going to fill up with water at one of the sites and back again? So.
To be absolutely honest, I'll have to check on the fire hydrant. It certainly hasn't been in operation since I've been here for 3 years, so it must have, you know, been historic before that. Obviously, the tankers can only hold so much water, so it depends how many issues they encounter during a day as to whether they will have to go back and fill up again. If every second gully is they're having to jet and jet and jet, yes, they will get through it quicker. Ultimately, they can only carry so much. We do have 7 depots across the county, however, so we're trying to minimise. Obviously, it's always a balance, too many assets everywhere, and that's another capital expenditure and maintenance expenditure for you, but we do have that. So we do try to manage it as best we can within the limitations of providing the service and, you know, how the actual equipment works and what's required to flush it out. But yeah, it's always a balancing job, but we're always open to, can we get something else, does something else improve it, can we access a water source somewhere else, etc. At the moment, however, you know, our system is we do have to go to the depots if, you know, when they've got to the point that they've used their, you know, full tank that was there in the morning.
just really actually shows the ignorance that I've got. I'm using fire hydrants, and I don't know where that water comes from. It's just magic under the ground. The fire department put their hose in, and obviously there's water. I don't know whether there's a tank underground. I don't know what feeds it. You know, it's just something that magically happens. And
I think it comes from the mains, Brent. As long as it doesn't come from your water meter,
no, I know.
you're all right. Okay, you'll have a big bill if that case.
Thank
Over
you.
to a lead, Councillor Payne.
Yeah, I just want to note, Chairman, I'm really pleased to see this report because one of the things that we prioritised, certainly when I took over as lead member, was to look at what we call the signs, lining and gullies, the signage and the lining on the road, and to try and do something to improve that because we recognise there is massive scope to make vast improvements in those areas. This is a part of that programme, and we have put additional resources in, which has resulted in not only this pilot taking place, which has established some benchmarks that we can work off, but also a clear action plan to try and improve the frequency of the cleaning of the gullies. It always amazes me the scale of what we're dealing with here, 120,000 gullies. I was at a parish council meeting the other evening, because it seems to be quite topical at the moment, and you know, we all think about our local areas and our local villages, but when you extrapolate that up to 120,000, it's no mean feat for the department to have to manage. So the fact that we're going to make such vast improvements, a number of figures have been bandied about. Certainly in my lead member meetings, it was once spoken that we were clearing about 45,000 gullies a year. The report tells us this year currently it will be about 64,000, but we're looking to clean over 90,000 gullies out of those 120,000 gullies a year, and in anyone's money that is a massive improvement, and that should be commended. The second point I'd like to make is whilst we have recently engaged external contractors, the private sector, and we've compared performance, this isn't a matter of public sector bad, private sector good at all. I think the directors explained where some of the variances in performance come from, and I think yourself touched upon the pay structures, and there are different structures that the public sector use to what the private sector use, and I think there might be a fair point in when you incentivise a certain performance, we need to be assured that the quality of that output is still ongoing, and I'm sure the department will have plans in place to monitor that. But I think what it tells us here is we have the right approach. I said this when we insourced the waste and recycling sites in Leicestershire, and I stood in front of the TV camera, and it's claimed that you're a Conservative-led authority, aren't you in favour of privatisation? I told the camera at that point in time that we're in favour of where the evidence takes us, and the evidence in this instance says that we should have a partnership. We should have our own teams that deal with the reactive stuff, which can be extremely costly to deal with, but for the planned performance and the planned maintenance, we should use other mediums, which we're doing. So I'm particularly pleased with the report and the direction of travel, and I'd like to commend it to you.
Thank you, Blake. Dean, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. It's just a small question regarding surface road dressing. Uplands Road in my patch was done last week, and they did tape all the gully, well, most of the gullies off. They missed the odd one. Then they take the taping off, and obviously you've still got all that grit which they leave on for a week, and then they come and clean it up. Do they go round and clear the gullies afterwards as well? Because obviously you've got all this tremendous amount of grit on the road for a week. A lot of it is going to go down the gullies. It's bound to. I was just wondering if you do go afterwards and clear them out.
Not as a routine one. What we do is there's a programme of so many days and so many weeks after each surface dressing of actually going and sweeping. And I think if there's any issues, particularly note that there's an awful lot of loose grit, etc., that's then notified back to our operations control room so they can then look at gully emptying. But it doesn't happen as a matter of routine that we've surface dressed this, therefore we must go out in 2 weeks and gully cleanse or something. It's actually done through observation of the sweeping regime that happens after we surface dressed.
Just to add to that, and then if we are good with our data, we would know, wouldn't we, if the top dressing was causing a problem?
Well, actually, our data is gathered when we go round. So if we're going round now on a 10-month frequency, we will be updating that data in a 10-month frequency. So something like this instance where we've done something in between or something else has happened, there's been a massive storm and loads of trees have come down, or leaves have come down, probably would be triggered first by a interaction, a customer inquiry through to us, rather than through this cyclical cleansing and therefore monitoring of the data and how full that gully is or not.
Final one for me, just interested, I was going to ask in the briefing, do we analyse what's taken out the gully so we got an idea what's causing it apart from leaves and stuff? Is there do we, like you would do a drain, is it oil from the chip pan that you've shouldn't have chucked down, that sort of stuff?
We don't stick it in a little vial and put it under a microscope. No, sorry, we don't do that. Actually, what we rely on, because each gully, we've got an operative there, literally with a massive big, tube that sucks up, etc., is actually human observation. So if there's anything out of the ordinary, they will report it. I'm sure you would have seen the recent media stories about odd things we find down gully pots, and that comes through the human observation rather than any kind of scientific analysis.
Thank you. I don't think there's any. Oh, Christine, we've got a question there.
I'm just going to ask something. I'm not sure whether I'm allowed to, but with new housing, quite often there's a lot of mud come off the road, and if we have to go and clean up quite quickly because there's caused blockages, gullies. Do we, as an authority, charge the developer if it's them that are causing the problems to the gullies? Because in my area, where we got the new houses, we have had issues. Well, it was earlier in the year when we had all that rain, and they hadn't got a system in place on the development site to make sure the mud didn't all go down. So I just wondered whether or not we charge the developer if it's their fault.
Normally what happens if it's off a development, I can't speak about specific ones, Christine, because I haven't got that information, but normally what happens if it's off a development, it will then be enforced that they have to have their wheel cleansing, etc., or clean up what's being, the detritus left. If there's nothing on site on place, we will be requesting that. But the only other thing is, if it is a severe issue, we will then go out and do it, and yes, we would look to recharge. But the vast majority, and the way it should operate, is the developer actually takes the action, so bears the cost.
I think we've some good questions, and I think general questions, which are excellent. And I think we close that one. We go to the next agenda item, which is performance report, and I think it's on page 57, 66 of your pack. And I think we go over to Anne again on the performance.
Thank you, Chair. This is a report that you all look forward to every quarter. This time it's not exactly the same as the previous ones, because you will have noticed, the BDI ones among you will have noticed that we have a revamped dashboard that's attached to this report. The reason for that is we now have our strategic outcomes under a strategic plan for the Council. So we have revised it in line with those strategic outcomes. The other things I would highlight up front before I suggest we take you through that dashboard is that a number of the performance indicators are in the development phase, primarily because we have recently just, and you're very aware because we brought this to you, recently had approval for the environment strategy. So the work under that is determining the exact nature and targets, etc., of a number of indicators, and that's what you'll see in here. Also, some waste indicators will be refreshed when the government releases its waste and resources strategy, expected by the end of the calendar year. Okay, so just to caveat that. Can I just suggest actually we turn to the dashboard, if that's all right, and I'll talk you through that, given that there are some new indicators on it and it does have a different look. First thing you'll notice is there's a column on the left-hand side called Outcome. Those titles there you see, keeping people safe, strong economy, great communities, etc. They are our, as in LCC, strategic outcomes. What we have done is we've aligned our performance indicators to each of those strategic outcomes to show, key performance in moving towards and delivering on some of those outcomes there. Some of those performance indicators, as I say, are ones you're very familiar with, and others are new ones. The first two under keeping people safe are ones that you have seen before, the total casualties on our roads. That has met our interim target and the long-term target and is continuing to fall, as you'll see from the trend chart. As is the next one, number of people killed and seriously injured on our roads. Again, that is continuing to fall. However, it is rated as amber, primarily because we're not hitting the interim or the long-term target. It's still above that, although the numbers are falling. What I would caveat here, and we have had this discussion before, we do have a caveat on it because we have seen some real reductions in the overall number of casualties or accidents being reported through the police Stats 19 system. And we're working with the police to understand how maybe some changes in their practices might be having implications then for the numbers of accidents that are actually being reported. So there is always just that caveat on that one. Moving on, there hasn't been any changes to the percentage of classified road network where structural maintenance is considered, because that's an annual target, so there's no further updates. But as you say, we're very much, as you see from that, very much on target with that, and that's green. Overall satisfaction with the conditions of the road is the same. It's not update. That's an annual one, so that's as previously, and it is all on track. Average vehicle speeds during the morning peak, again, that's actually DFT produced data on an annual basis. Well, actually, no, it's more than an annual basis, but really we are at their mercy when they issue the latest figures on that. But again, green, very much on track. The next one, percentage of businesses citing concerns about traffic congestion, that's actually a new one. And that is taken from a survey that the Local Enterprise Partnership carries out for Leicestershire. And as you'll see, while we've got the data on that, we are considering carefully what in developing under the work of and under other work that's going on, what those targets there should be. So we're having a look at that, given to what we think may be a realistic, but still a stretching target in that area. Local bus passenger journeys, again, this is one that you have seen, but the thing I'm going to highlight on that is actually it's changed. It kind of has sat at 13 million in terms of passenger journeys since December 2016. We actually have seen a rise there. This last reporting has seen it's going up to 13.2 million. Despite that, and despite meeting the targets, it is rated as amber, but that's because that very last column is quartiles compared to other comparator authorities. How are we doing compared to our comparators? And we're actually in the fourth quartile for that. So while, as I say, it's now had a very recent shift in the right direction and meets our target, it's amber because we're not doing well when you look across our comparator authorities. Moving on to great communities, the percentage of footpaths and other rights of way, that's a new one. That survey work is showing that we are meeting our targets that have been set there, and we will continue to monitor how that one goes over time. Just before we turn the page, I would just highlight the footnote to you. There are another couple of indicators there that we're currently working up to develop what they will actually look like, that we feel would be particularly helpful for us under the strong economy outcome. And they are one around highways development management. That is our function as a statutory consultee to the planning process, providing our highway comments to planning applications, etc. And that's all then about assisting and helping deliver growth across the county. We've just instigated a new IT system, however, that deals with monitoring and recording all those processes. So we're looking at, how we best shape that indicator and what the targets might be. The other one, capital security, unlock housing development, support delivery of jobs. One of the key functions of the department is about bidding for capital monies, primarily from government, for infrastructure, transport infrastructure, that unlocks jobs and housing. So that is a key function that we can do that really enables growth across the county. Again, however, we're looking at what that indicator is, given that, basically we react to funding opportunities that come forward from government, and we don't always have, a clear foresight of that. It can be very ad hoc. So we will look to bring those back to you in future. Moving on to the environment and waste performance one in the next page. we've covered some of these discussions in the earlier part of the meeting. The first three on that list have ones you have seen before. The middle one, the percentage of household waste sent by local authorities across Leicestershire for reuse, recycling, composting, is the one we've referred to earlier. I'm just going to remind you, as you've all know already, that has again fallen in terms of performance. However, I was going to suggest we refrain from any further discussion than we've had earlier in the meeting, because we will be bringing a detailed report back to you next month, at your next meeting, to consider that and to go into the ins and outs behind that. The other ones, as you'll see there, percentage of household waste per household, we are meeting the targets. It's rated amber, however, because we are in that fourth quartile when we're looking at our comparator authorities. CO2 emissions per capita in the local area is a new one. We've got the latest data, as you can see, and that's in tonnes, 5.372. Again, the work with the environment strategy that's just been put in place, the work that's happening now that has been approved, is looking at what appropriate targets around that should be, and we'll bring that back to you at a future meeting. Tonnes of waste produced from LCC sites, again, and the following one, percentage waste recycled from LCC sites. You'll see there, these are previous ones you've had. They're both green and on target there from the latest data. That's not quarter one, that's actually quarter four data from last year, which is the latest we have. The next one is a new one, percentage energy from renewable sources. Again, under the environment strategy, we're working up what the appropriate target may be, and you can see our performance. The latest performance we've got is 10.9%. Just to remind you, you'll be aware there was a cabinet report just before summer whereby the authority signed up to UK 100, which is a pledge to achieve 100% by 2050. So obviously any targets need to consider, in terms of milestones, need to consider how it will take us in that direction, or to that point by 2050. The amount of renewable energy generated as a percent of consumption, again, is new, and you can see we have actually set an interim target and we have met that on that latest data we've got. The corporate enablers, these next three again are the targets that are all being worked out. Well, we've got the data, we're looking at the targets under the environment strategy work, and obviously we'll just need to see how those go over time. Again, though, that's quarter three data from 17-18. The business miles one is one you're all very frequent with, and that's continuing to fall. So again, good news on that. The last one is a new one, percentage of staff who say LCC is doing enough to reduce its environmental impact. We had previously had, and Blake will remember, a debate about, what does this tell us? How useful is this one, etc. This is the level is actually determined by an e-learning module we have for staff on environment. So staff would go through that, it gives them a lot of information, asks them a lot of questions, and at the end of that we would then ask them this question. So they are fairly well informed about what's happening, etc., in our approach to environment strategy. And what we felt was any changes in trend over time would then maybe be a flag to us. Staff think we're doing great and it's getting better and better, or satisfaction's going down. What do we need to look at? What are we not doing right? Where do we need to improve? What should we be focusing on? So we really much took the view of this. Rather than telling us anything specific, it was more of a temperature gauge to monitor how we were doing at that point in time. I appreciate that's an awful lot of information and some of it will be new, but happy to answer questions, as will Joe and Nicola.
Okay, okay, we've got a question from Max. Over to you, Max.
Thanks very much, Chair. First of all, I think these performance reports have a crucial importance to this committee. They should really be presented by the performance team, should they not? But I'll leave that one aside. The things that we need to note here are the ambers and the greens, sorry, the reds, or the greys and the not so greys. But we are approaching those at future meetings, so I'm relatively happy to wait for a later occasion to discuss the killed and seriously injured, again, that will come up soon enough, and recycling. What I felt was missing here from these new, they're quite user-friendly. I find them quite easy to grasp, you know, and most of them do hit the important things that our residents are concerned about. But there's nothing here about air quality, and that's come forward in the area of transport quite prominently in the last year or so, and I just wondered if officers have a comment on that. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, just from my experience, I know you've been talking a lot, but one of the issues with the air quality is, of course, we rely on district reports. Is that correct? And so it's not just this is where we work with partners, Max. So I'm sure Anne's going to support that, because I think from being a district council as well, that's an issue. So it's difficult for we have to wait for a lot of information to come in to generate the complete picture. I know you'll fill in on that. Thank you.
That's absolutely correct, Chair. Air quality is within the environment strategy, and in that we acknowledge there is a partnership approach that's very much needed to deal with air quality. It doesn't, predominantly sit with one party or another. As Chair says, very much the district authorities have the duty for air quality monitoring, depending on the issues in a particular area where that monitoring shows, various levels are exceeded. We then, in a role with our hat on as Highway Authority, for instance, would then look to work with them to see what we could do in that area. Sometimes it will be transport related. Sometimes, as we know, there will be a whole host of different issues, or, it may not involve any of our functions as well. But it very much is a partnership thing in terms of trying to tackle. We do have it it's embedded within the environment strategy, although we haven't, for some of those reasons, picked it out as a particular performance indicator to report on quarterly.
You can respond, yes. Fire away, Max.
On that point, I understand that, having been a district councillor for some years, but it does lead to a feeling that we don't know who's in charge, because no doubt someone over in a district will be saying, well, it's to do with transport, and therefore it's county. And I think that's something that's endemic in the problems we've got as a two-tier authority. Thank you.
Okay, point taken. We'll just go. Thank you, Max. We'll just. I don't think there's an answer to that, so we'll move on. I think also I'm sure everybody's aware of that RAG can be misleading. So you can have a green. So I think we need to focus that is actually going down in a percentage. We can have an amber that's going down, and actually a red that's actually going up and has got a high percentage of improvement. So I think we do look at each one and what direction. For me, sometimes a green going down can be as negative as a red staying still. So I think we need to focus on that and not be just look at the colours. Jonathan.
Thank you, Chair. Question really about. It's great seeing this and having been involved with community CSPs, community safety partnerships for a while. Exactly the same systems used there, and actually works very well as a quick way of being able to sort of assess overall performance. So it's great to actually see this summaries here. I think the experience I've had before is always about making sure that the items that we're measuring are reflect priorities, and also that they are accurate. I think Max has touched on the points about relevance, and I think pretty well all of those I can sort of see and they stand out as being very key points. So absolutely supports the key performance indicators side of it. The couple of ones that are probably have slightly more concerns out, which are to do with surveys rather than necessarily hard evidence and hard facts. One is obviously an internal staff survey about overall feeling about are we doing our bit, and I guess that's probably a measure for us as an organisation, because it's as much it's a measure of communication as it is actually of performance. So it's slightly subjective as to what it is actually measuring. The other one that I have to say I'm very concerned about is actually the one provided by the LEP. It's marked down as 28%. That could be everything from 14 respondents to possibly even 4 respondents, depending on rounding errors. So it would be useful always, I think, to actually understand how big a survey that is, whether it's actually covering a significant number of businesses, whether it's actually covering relevant businesses. The LEP includes a lot of businesses that don't actually include a lot of travel. For instance, they could actually be IT businesses that are actually just stationary within their own business. They could be working from home. All sorts of different companies. So actually, the quality of that response, I think, because it's outside of our control, I wonder whether there's a different question we could ask that can actually generate an answer using hard evidence, hard data, rather than something highly subjective that's outside of our control. Because it would be good to have something that actually genuinely measures the truth, rather than actually just a few people's perceptions. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Jonathan. Councillor Payne, you'd like to respond?
Yeah, just very quickly, and I think there's a few responses to this. Both those points were picked up at my previous lead member meeting, so I agree they're the relevant questions to ask about those particular indicators. Just on I'll take the final one, the percentage of staff who say LCC is doing enough to reduce its environmental impact. My concern isn't with the indicator. My concern, and I'll put it bluntly because I put it this way to the Directorate, why is the opinion of the staff more important than the opinion of the public? That's the way I put it. We had a bit of a debate about it. Actually, it does make sense, although the directors acknowledged it's a temperature check. There are the assurances that it's after a training module that we'll receive this data. And I think it's better than nothing. It's virtually impossible to go out to the public and get a representative answer. But I think it's of such crucial importance in terms of how we're performing when it comes to environmental concerns that we do need to keep a target of some description coming in to us so we can monitor our performance. So for that reason, I'm perfectly happy to keep that as an indicator with the, if you like, the caveat that it is a temperature check rather than an absolute output. On the LPP, the Enterprise Partnership Indicator, I asked the very same question. I think I was told it's about 1,500 businesses.
Yeah, the report surveyed 1,121 establishments, and that represented about 380,000 staff. So it was 28% of those that had.
How many responded? That's how many surveys go out. I used to be part of the CBI, and the number of people that the CBI represents is significant. But in reality, the number of businesses. Sorry, apologies. So it's the quality of the respondents, and I'm saying it's if we don't know who those respondents are, then that's the question mark, I think.
My understanding is that we got 1,000 surveys back that represented those organisations that cover a huge amount of people, which was that 380,000. We can get some more information back to you if you're keen to know more about that. But I think that it's generally widely accepted, the report. The only problem with the report is that the commitment to do it, and at the moment there isn't another commitment to complete that, and that was my concern about that data.
Can I just, before you do we know how the survey, was it paper, was it telephone?
I think it was telephone, from what I understand.
Yeah, just from a businessman, I just find them irritating. They take too long. You cut off. You say things that you don't. I'm being honest. They're not. Telephone surveys are not much to hang your coat on, I've got to say, as a businessman. And I've tried to do them sometimes. I think at the end of it, if it's going on 15 minutes, I'll say anything just to get them off the phone. But that's me. Anyway, Anne, over to you.
I'm sure you never have a conversation as short as 15 minutes. Anyway, just absolutely accept, there's feelings and all of these things, and ultimately at the end of the day it's subjective. Somebody driving into work that day might have got stopped in roadworks or been in a traffic jam, and therefore we have a really negative response. I think, however, what we're trying to do here is bear in mind the outcome strong economy, and the private sector and business and enabling business is really important to us. Actually, what can we measure? What is the data we've got? So we may not have hit on the right thing, but that's what we're trying to do. It's actually, because we cannot create an industry of we have to go out and collect a lot more. We just do not have the resources. So what's available, we can tap into to begin to give us an idea that what we do as a department in services, highways, environment, waste, all the rest of it, how is it helping them or hindering them? we're open to suggestions is what I would say, because it's quite a difficult one, but we recognise it's an important one. So how can we get some kind of measure? Are we making a difference, and are we going in the right direction for the business community?
I absolutely agree with all of that. I think my only commentary at the beginning was and by the sounds of it, you're asking the same question, which is there another question we can ask that actually gives us as good an answer, but is actually based on hard data that's actually out there, that's not reliant on a third party surveying members, that we're not in control of the data gathering. You're asking the same question.
Just quickly back to the staff. When we do surveys, staff are public. They vote, and it's a major point that it's not a bad thing. I think we've got a lot of staff come here. There's nothing wrong with that. I think doing surveys, I think it's actually economically sound. I think if you've got people and you can do it. Any other questions before we move on to the next?
It's not a question. I just want to make. I couldn't resist not making this point. And it's a shame Mr. Bolter isn't actually here today, because every time we receive a performance report,
he's told me he's coming back.
Oh, is he? Maybe when we take quarter two, we can make the same point. But just for note, the tonnes of waste produced from LCC sites and the percentage of waste recycled from LCC sites. If members recall that stand on the panel as a standing member, that's always been, I think, amber at best, red at worst. You'll notice that's green for the first time in a long time. I did try my best to get rid of the indicator, but it appears that it's of relevance. And the only other point I'd like to make, if members do feel there is a relevant indicator that hasn't been included in this new, if you like, monitoring approach, please let us know and it will be considered. We're not saying it will be included, but once it's been considered properly, it might be possible to include it. But if you do come up with an indicator that you wish to see and is of relevance to what we're doing here, please let us know.
Okay, thank you, Blake. We'll go to agenda item 11. These are the dates. They're in your pack, but it's the 11th of October, 8th of November, January 2019. We all know how time flies, so put them in your diary. 7th of March, 8th of June, this is 2019, 5th of September, 7th of November. So don't plan anything else unless you're getting married or leaving the country. How do you reckon, Christine? Okay. I don't think there's any other business, but can I just say, from scrutiny point of view, I think there was some good questions. That's what we're here for. Keep it going. It's a pleasure to have you on board, and look forward to seeing you again at the next meeting. Have a safe journey home. Take care. Thank you.